Hello friends, our reading for today is taken from Matthew chapter 20, the first 16 verses. That has the parable of the workers that are hired in the vineyard. You'll know the story well. A landowner goes out to hire some workers, and he employs them for the day and promises them a denarius, a day's wage, a generous day's wage actually. And then he goes out again during the course of the day multiple times and recruits new workers to come and work in the field. And at the end of the day, he pays all of them the same wage. It is a story that has many meanings, but what stands out for me most today is it's a story about grace. About grace, amazing grace in this story that we get in our gospel today, Matthew chapter 20. We see, first of all, that the landlord is generously inclusive. He goes out early in the morning, perhaps 5 o'clock in the morning, so before sunrise he is already out and gathering up workers and inviting them to come and work in his field and promising them a denarius, which was not just a day's wage, but a generous day's wage. And then he goes out again at 9 a.m., he goes out at noon, he goes out at 3, and even at 5 he still goes out and recruits people to come and work in his vineyard and promises to pay them a fair wage. In the evening, he then pays all of his workers. We know that we are created to work. We get this in Genesis, at the very beginning of Scripture, that God put Adam into the garden and commissioned him to take care of it. That was the first career, in a way. The first job was to work in the garden as a gardener. This is deeply woven into our DNA, I believe, that we are made to work and to be productive. Whether we get paid for it or not is not the question. The idea is about being actively involved in the world and in building society and in serving God. And so when Jesus goes out, when the landowner goes out, well, the landowner is Jesus. When the landowner goes out at 5 p.m., late in the day, after people have been working since probably 5 in the morning. He says to them, "Why are you just standing around and not working?" And they say, "Nobody has hired us. No one has given us the opportunity to work." And then the landowner says, "Well, then come and work." And they probably only work 2 or 3 hours before the end of the workday. But even then, God is inviting us to come and work in his vineyard, to live out what he created us to do, this deep need that humans have to be productive and creative and to invest in the world. At the end of the day, he calls all of the workers together and he pays them all 1 denarius. Those who had worked probably 12 hours and those who had worked maybe only a couple of hours, they all get paid a day's labor. Obviously, some of them had done far more work and were perhaps deserving of far more than others who had come on board late and had worked little. And so those who had started early became resentful and grumbled at the landowner to say, "Why are we getting paid so little? We should get paid more because we did so much more work." And they were working, understandably, because the story is an economic story fundamentally. It is about labor and about earning a day's wage. They were saying we should get paid a salary equivalent or commensurate with what we have done, and we should therefore earn more than those who came in at the very end. But although the story is set in the context of labor and economics, it is not a story about labor and economics. It is fundamentally a story about grace. It is about God's great, generous, and extravagant grace to all humankind. We do tend to economize and monetize our faith. We do have a sense that if we'd give a large amount of money to the church, we should somehow reap the rewards of that spiritually, and God should be good to us. There are churches that say explicitly that the more you give, the more God will give you. And in this story, this is not the teaching that we get from Jesus. Instead, we get almost a counterintuitive teaching where everybody earns the same. It reminds me of the story about the thief on the cross that we get in Luke chapter 23. The thief on the cross hangs there. He has not been a good person. He was a criminal. He was being executed fairly, perhaps, for his crime. But he says to Jesus, Jesus, remember me, Lord, remember me in your kingdom, when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says, this very day, you will be with me in paradise. This very day. The thief was still hanging on the cross. There was nothing he could do. He couldn't make any donations to the church. He couldn't do any mission work. He couldn't serve tea. He couldn't participate in the choir or be a lay minister or anything else. He had no opportunity to do anything to justify anything from God. And yet he is given the gift of salvation, this great, precious, extravagant gift of grace. Fundamentally, dear friends, grace is unfair. That's the sense, that's the whole point about grace, is that it's not fair. The idea is that you get what you do not deserve. That we all get what we do not deserve. Whether we started at 5 in the morning or whether we were hired at 5 in the evening, we all get what we do not deserve. I really want to encourage you to reflect on this great gift of grace that we get from God. Fix your eyes upon Jesus, and not on the things of this world. Keep your eyes focused on him and his generosity and his inclusivity. And let us be amazed by grace. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.